Brilliant. Well, look, thanks for joining us this evening. I wanted to take the opportunity to give you a couple of updates about things that are happening in school, particularly in relation to phonics and early reading, and why we're putting such a heavy focus on this at the moment for children in nursery reception, year 1 and year 2. What I hope you'll appreciate I won't be able to do tonight is go through the nuts and bolts of everything. But if you do go away today and you've got some questions, please feel free to speak to me or to any member of the team. And hopefully you'll find the session useful. We're going to cover a couple of things. So I want to just share with parents some of the key principles that we're following around the development of early reading in school. So principally phonics as the vehicle to support children with their early reading. I also want to give you a little bit of information about how phonics is taught at home. And most importantly, share some strategies about how we can work together to maximise the impact that we have on children. So I'm going to be really open tonight. This is our #1 school improvement priority for children in nursery reception year 1 and year 2. It is front and centre of our staff CPD, our monitoring, and in fact investing resources in this area. And the reason for that is we're seeing that COVID and the impact of the lockdowns has had a particular impact on phonics. And where we initially thought there'd be some quick fixes, that hasn't been the case for all children. So I'm just going to explore that for a second. In the first lockdown, when we were all still working out what was happening, and I thought school was going to be closed for 2 weeks, we, like pretty much every other school, weren't quick enough at getting our home learning right. Now, we resolved that by the second lockdown, but in that first lockdown, children missed out, particularly our youngest children, on key bits of teaching that they need for success in education going forward. And when they came back to school, we prioritised one part of phonics to try and catch up. But ultimately, that's been really tricky. In the second lockdown, we did provide phonics sessions online daily for children. But what we found was that was good at helping certain aspects of phonics, but actually for other aspects of phonics, it didn't help the children move forward. And when the children returned to school, the result was we had lots of children with very different gaps in phonics and very different needs, which made it difficult to move them together onwards. The other point that I say, and I don't say with any criticism at all, parents were doing their absolute best during those lockdowns, and many children were accessing phonics resources on things like YouTube and online, where perhaps the articulation of phonemes were more American resources, and therefore children have either learnt incorrect articulation, or in some cases they've learnt letter names but not the sounds that the letters make. And I'll explain why that's important in a moment, but that's had an impact on reading. So I'm aware that in painting that picture, you might be a little bit worried, but as you'd expect, we're working very hard to address that. And for us, we're concerned the children aren't where they would normally be, but they're still in a reasonable position. We have very high expectations at home, and we want by the end of year 2, every child to be fluent and confident in their reading. So we are putting a lot of effort to make sure that that still happens, and we narrow that gap very quickly. So what are we doing about it? All the staff have undergone a training session, and the training's been in a couple of parts. So first of all, there was face-to-face training for the staff at the inset day to make sure we were all consistent and approaching this in the same way. And then all staff members have completed 3 online e-learning videos that link directly to our scheme. So directly to what we're teaching, we've had some training specifically to that. We're implementing a new scheme and we're showing absolute fidelity to that scheme. And what we mean is we are very structured, that is the scheme that we follow. And even if we've got some nice resources and we want to do a little bit of something else, we're actually saying, look, we need to really stick to this scheme to make sure that we're plugging all the gaps. Number one priority I've mentioned, we've put an intervention in place in Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2 at the moment. So Key Stage 2, that would be for children who are still struggling with phonics as they move into Key Stage 2. And at this stage, we're prioritising our staff support on Key Stage 1 intervention. For children in nursery and early years, there are 3 adults, sorry, nursery and reception, there are 3 adults in there full time working on phonics. So at this stage, we don't feel they need intervention because there's a constant stream of little group work activities to plug the gaps that children have. We've introduced a new phonics assessment system, which will help us identify very quickly the very specific gaps that children have. I'm going to share a little bit about that with you shortly. We're embedding phonics across the curriculum, regular monitoring to make sure that what we're doing is having an impact. And I did learning works of phonics last week, and again, I had a walk around today. It is having an impact. You know, we are absolutely tackling this. And the bit that we're here for tonight is we want to engage parents with this as well. So I'm going to share a little bit about what we're talking about in terms of phonics, because most people, and don't take any offence by this, but judging by the age of our parents, will not have learned to read through systematic synthetic phonics. It was introduced a little bit later. So systematic synthetic phonics is something that all schools have to do to ensure that children learn to read in a really structured way. So in the past, it might have been many children learned to read by memorizing words and also learning sounds, but not in a particularly structured way. It might be more linked to the alphabet. Phonics doesn't follow the pattern of learning A, B, C, D, E, and so on. It follows a pattern which is about enabling children to learn sounds, to read and write them in a way that enables them to read and write independently as quickly as possible. So the first sounds that children learn are s, a, t, p, in, satpin, because that enables children to make lots of little words very quickly. So they're able to become independent readers. Now, there are 4 elements of phonics teaching. The first is the rapid recall of GPCs. What that means is grapheme phoneme correspondence. What that means is the letters and the sounds that they make. Okay, so that's the cornerstone, the first piece of the jigsaw. So children learn the sounds that letters can make. They also learn that some words, you can't use phonics to read them. So you just have to learn them. They're common exception words, they're tricky words, and they need to learn to read and write those. 2 really important skills is that they use their knowledge of the sounds and the letters that the sounds make to be able to segment, so break up words, and to blend, put sounds together. And I'll explain a little bit more about that. But without going into a linguistics lesson or going into too much detail, that's ultimately what phonics teaching does. Teach children the sounds, some common exception words, and teaches them to blend and segment. Now, fairly straightforward, there's 26 letters. Those letters can make 44 sounds. So some vowels particularly have alternate vowel sounds and can make different sounds. And when we put letters together, they can also make different sounds. So the English language is very, very tricky because there's 26 letters, 44 sounds, and hundreds of different ways of creating it. And that's why the structured approach is really important. And that's why children practice this every day in nursery, reception, year 1 and year 2. So I've mentioned the current barriers to achievement, so I'm just going to skip through that and I'm going to jump on to segmenting. Segmenting is the key skill that children need to develop to be able to write. So to be able to use their phonics knowledge to write words, write sentences, and ultimately spell them correctly as well. Now, segmenting is fundamentally about listening to words and trying to identify how many sounds are in the word. So what you might start seeing is children at home being asked to segment words and count the sounds in the word. Because for them to be able to read and write, they need to know how many sounds are in them. So tin, for example, you might see children going t, I, n, 3 sounds. And they should be counting on their chin. That's something we're reinforcing across the school, because we want children to get used to actually, if they can hear the sounds, when they come to write it, they know what graphemes they're looking for, what letters and letter combinations they're looking for. Now, it isn't as easy as one letter, one sound, because if you look at rain, for example, a, n, they know there's 3 sounds, but actually there's the digraph, so 2 letters making 1 sound in there. So the first bit of information for parents is when children are struggling to read words or struggling to write words, ask them how many sounds are in their words and ask them to segment it. And if you're asking them to segment it, you should see them doing that counting on their chin. That's a really, really important skill to develop. And it was one that we weren't able to do whilst teaching online, because trying to get children to hear the sounds is quite tricky. And I'll talk about how we prepare them for that in a moment. Blending is the key skill in the development of word reading. So this means that children are able to look at words and be able to, many would say, sound them out. Now, for children to be able to blend, they need to know the letter sounds. And you can see if you look at light, there's l, I, t. There's 3 sounds in there. And they need to know the sounds that they make. What's really important is that the children learn to articulate those sounds in the shortest possible way, and that they learn the correct articulation. Because if they learn the letter name L, and they go L, I, T, it is harder for them to hear that's the word. So very, very short sounds are really important for children when they're reading. So when they're reading for you, please check that they're not holding on their sounds for a very long time. The other thing that children sometimes do is called schwaring. It's very difficult for me to say that, but schwaring is where they add an emphasis at the end of the sound. So for example, rather than the letter M, which makes the sound they might go emma. I've really accentuated that, but they would add almost a little bit of accentuation at the end. And if they learn the sounds in that way, it makes blending very difficult. Now, you're probably sat there thinking, well, look, I'm not going to learn the 44 sounds. There are some things that the children will know, and we're also going to share some things with you that will help them articulate them properly at home. But my kind of top tip is, if you're never, ever not sure about the sound and your child's reading at home, there's a YouTube site called Mr. Thorne Does Phonics. And I'll share that link with these slides. But Mr. Thorne Does Phonics has every sound articulated correctly. So some of you might remember Mrs. Sharp, who was our early years teacher a number of years ago. She had a Scottish accent and she really struggled with the R sound, the because she accentuated them with her accent. She had to use Mr. Thorne Does Phonics to make sure the children were learning the pure sound. So feel free to use those. But hopefully that just gives you an idea that when children are struggling to read, the kind of things that mean that they will struggle is they either don't know the sounds that the letters make, or they're struggling to segment the sounds, so listening and counting how many sounds are in there, and they're struggling to put them together again. And, you know, the biggest mistake is incorrect articulation, and also children not doing short sounds, doing quite long sounds, making it more tricky. We also find that as children become more confident, they'll start to guess words as well. And it is really important to slow them down and go for accuracy. Okay, so a little bit about our scheme and where we can work together. So we're implementing a scheme called Twinkle Phonics. Parents might be familiar with Twinkle. We've used the resources during lockdowns, but it's been developed by specialists, and it's also been approved by the Department for Education as a scheme that, you know, implemented correctly, can have great impact on the children. We are approaching a consistent whole school approach, so children in nursery right through to children who still need phonics support in year 6 will be using the same strategies and the same resources, so they build familiarity and consistency. There's rigor in that scheme. It is quite fast paced, but the children will get used to that pace and also the very clear structure of a phonics session. And generally, we find that children enjoy the phonics sessions because they're fast-paced and they're active. So there's lots of games, you know, maybe hunting for words, try to make words, a hopscotch with different sounds on. You know, there's lots of different things they can do. And children in all the groups now are using magic wands, magic glasses, magic mic, which is a microphone, to kind of sound out. And that's consistent throughout. So if they, you know, if the children come out when they talk about, oh, I've used the magic mic today, that means that they've been doing some reading, and we've really focused on that with a microphone, but that is consistent throughout the school. All the children in nursery reception 1 and 2 have 25-minute sessions in small groups every day. Some children might be having additional 15-minute sessions. So they have a 25-minute session, which is their phonics session, but they might come and have some 1-to-1 or 1-to-2 support with a member of staff as well. So, you know, there'll be a number of things going on. Children in small groups, and they may be taught by teachers or by teaching assistants. All the planning, all the monitoring, all the assessment is the same, and class teachers have an overview of that, as do I, as the English subject leader. The sessions themselves are a mixture of visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. So basically practical, visual, and lots of listening and sound. And the reason why we picked this scheme is because, as we're going to show you, there's some really good resources to support home learning as well, in a way that's hopefully simple for parents and not too onerous. So I just wanted to share this with you. This is what we would expect for children, to the progression we'd expect for them to move through school. So in nursery and preschool, so nursery for us, children would be working on what we call level 1 or phase 1, it's sometimes called. And that is 36 weeks. So that, you know, that in essence is a year. Okay. And I'll explain what level 1 is in a moment. Level 2, phase 2, introduction to reception. That's when they learn initial sounds, roughly 6 weeks, before moving on to level 3, where they learn the bulk of the sounds, which is 12 weeks. Level 4, which I'll come on to in a moment, also done by the end of reception. Year 1 is designated to level 5, phase 5, because at the end of, or in June of year 1, the children take a phonics screening test, which is a government test, which assesses children from right the way from year 1, from level 1 to level 5. In year 2, the children take part in level 6, which basically is about preparing them to use their phonics for spelling and learning about prefixes and suffixes and singular and plural, and starting to get to grips with the grammar, punctuation, and spelling aspects of the curriculum, ready for Key Stage 2. So with that, by the end of year 1, ideally, children should be fluent and confident in reading and reading unfamiliar words and unfamiliar texts. Now, lockdown has knocked some of that back. And actually, we've got a lot of children in year 1 who are still doing level 3, level 4. Most are on level 5, but there's still gaps going on. We're also finding some challenges with children in reception year 1 and 2, where level 1 isn't as developed. And I'll explain some of that in a moment. This week, we're going to tell you what phase or what level your child is working at. And we'll also share some resources about how you can help at home as well. But ultimately, that's our ambition. So rapid progress to make sure by the end of year 1, without the world of lockdowns, children are really confident. In year 2, it's all about kind of getting to grips with singular, plural, prefixes, suffixes, and spelling rules, ready for Key Stage 2. I should say, at any point, if you want to post any questions in the chat, I will come back to the questions at the end. So feel free. Just having a drink. Okay. So level 1, so being taught in nursery, this is the cornerstone, that kind of foundation that we need for children to be able to progress in phonics. And it'll be a lot of stuff that parents do at home, but it's about children being able to listen to sounds and discriminate what those sounds are. So for example, if you went outside asking the children what they can hear, can they hear one thing or can they hear 3 things? Can they hear the birds? Can they hear a car? Can they hear children playing? But developing the listening skills so that children can separate sounds. So what we tend to do is lots of going outside, listening. We also do some instrumental sounds, and we talk about high-pitched sounds, low-pitched sounds, following rhythms and clapping patterns. Really interesting. A lot of the children we have at the moment, if we clap a rhythm, they struggle to clap that rhythm back. And that's something we're working on, because that is, you know, the fundamental, being able to hear is really important, that when we come to writing, children can hear the sounds in words and they can separate them so that they can spell them. So the reason why level 1 is 36 weeks is to make sure that the listening skills are really, really well developed, and that they can make body percussion. That's interesting. Sounds with their bodies, voice sounds, alliteration, rhyme, nursery rhymes. All of that is really, really important to help them separate sounds and segment and blend as they move into formal phonics learning. This nationally is an area where we feel children's skills have deteriorated. And part of that is nursery rhymes perhaps aren't as in fashion as they used to be. Sometimes children would perhaps have iPad time before bedtime rather than story time. So it is having an impact. But what I would say to you, really important, just take those opportunities, ask the children what they can hear, sing nursery rhymes, read stories to them, clap patterns with them, you know, make funny sounds with the voices, because all of this is developing their listening skills ready for level 2. So level 2 is where we start to introduce the grapheme phoneme correspondence. So basically the letters and the sounds that they make. And you can see there the order in which we introduce them and the tricky sounds. And as I said, we start off with words that enable the children to, start off with letters that enable the children to experiment with sounds and start making words. Whilst the children are learning this, you should be learning to form these letters. So it's not just being able to say the sound correctly, it's also being able to write the grapheme, write the letter, and also being able to read it. So there's 3 skills with each grapheme phoneme correspondence. We have last year prioritized making sure the articulation was correct. We're having to make sure letter formation is also right and that the children can apply those sounds. You'll see as well that the children are learning tricky words. So in phase 2, to, the, no, go, I. They're words that the children should be able to read on sight. So they should be able to look at it, know what that word is, but they should also be able to write it and spell it as well. We found that children are really good at identifying tricky words, but one of the areas we're working on is making sure they can actually spell them correctly too. So then I'll move on to level 3 or phase 3, which is the bulk of reception. And what you'll see here is there's a lot more grapheme phoneme correspondences. So lots more sounds and the letters that they're making. Lots more letters than the sounds that they're making. And you'll see that we've got digraphs. So 2 letters making one sound, like sh, ng. And you'll also see that we come in to introduce trigraphs as well, ear, and so on. When we're introducing digraphs and trigraphs, we're trying to get children, when they're reading, to spot the digraph and spot the trigraph. Rather than sounding out each sound individually, we want them to be able to see the digraph and the trigraph. So A, where you can see 2 letters together or 3 letters together. If they can see that, that will help their reading fluency develop very quickly. And then you'll see there's more tricky words there. That's the bulk of reception. In year, at the end of reception, they move on to phase 4. Part of this is just consolidating the learning that they've had before, but also introducing adjacent consonants and different types of words. So if you can see here, we've got CVCC, that stands for consonant, vowel, consonant, consonant, and so on. And they're learning much more to spell and read some tricky words. Example of things that happen at phase 4. So if we think about stuck, st, make a st sound. So they're learning those sounds that the letters, when they're put together, make. That's quite a quick phase. That's 4 weeks. And our ambition is that that's done by the end of reception, to move into phase 5, which takes roughly 30 weeks. And this is a really challenging phase. So in this phase, the children need to learn the alternate sounds and the alternate ways of writing things as well, because it's not as simple as this makes this sound. It might make that sound, and it might also make another sound. So they spend a lot of time learning that. And we also introduce something called split vowel digraphs, which they're pretty tricky. So for example, if I think about the word like, the I and the E make the I sound together. But if the children sounded that out, they'd go, and that wouldn't give them the word like. So where we've got vowels that are split, but make a sound together, and they've got a consonant in the middle. So that can be really tricky for children. Sometimes you'll hear children talking about magic E, where there's an E on the end of the word, but actually the sound comes earlier. It's tricky. And as I say, level 6 is where there's a real focus on spelling and making sure that the children are able to use the correct graphemes for the sounds that they're making, and learn some of the spelling and grammar rules that they'll need to be fluent writers. So that's a very brief overview of what's covered. After this session, I'll share with you some resources which will be going on our school website and also being shared on Class Dojo, so that when we share where your child is, you will be able to look and see, actually, that's where they are and this is what's coming next. So you'll have an understanding about what we're working on. Okay, structure of a phonics session. We follow a 5-part structure. So the children start off by reviewing what they've already learned, so a little recap. We would teach new sounds, new grapheme phoneme correspondences, or new tricky words. Then they have a go at practicing them, and then they have a go at applying them, and applying them is either reading or writing. So whilst there's lots of practical earlier, this is about children being able to read or write and use the skills of segmenting and blending. And we end all sessions with an assessment to see which children have got it and whether they might need a little bit more support. Going back to the earlier progression that we have from the different phases, we do have some children that need further support. So they might be working slightly behind where we would expect them to be, or they might be ahead. So actually their level 1 skills might be brilliant and they're in nursery. So therefore they can start on level 2 before they start reception. That does happen. And because we stream for phonics, so we have groups, we're able to kind of make sure children are in the group that best meets their needs. Where children are only slightly behind, we would generally keep them in their age grouping. So if they're in reception, we'd expect them to be on phase 3. We would keep them in phase 3, but they might be having some extra support to plug the gaps that they've got from phase 2. So that would be like an extra 10 or 15-minute session a day, usually over a very short period of time, just to focus and plug those gaps. Okay. So it goes without saying that maximum learning is achieved when we're all doing the same thing. So when the children are using the same strategies as the teachers, and the parents and the teachers are aligned as well. And that's the purpose of the meeting today. So a couple of changes that we're bringing in, which is what we wanted to make you aware of today. Each week, we're now going to post on Class Dojo, on the class story, the sounds that your child is learning that week. Some weeks that might be 3 or 4 sounds. Now, with that, we'll be sharing this parent sheet, which is something that children can do at home. You do not need to print this sheet off. It could just be one that you know what the children are doing. So when you read into them, you can make sure they're articulating those sounds correctly. Or you might have a go. So this is an example of one of the parent information sheets. So this is for the digraph. And the word that children will use to remember it is moth. And with all of our sounds, there's an action, and we tell you what the action is. So if your child is doing this when they say moth, or they use the sound, you know why. We've also given some examples of words that use the sound. Now, you'll notice that under the sounds, there are either dashes or dots. A dash indicates if it's 2 letters making one sound, so a digraph. So a dot indicates that it's 1 letter making 1 sound. That should help the children with blending. So if they go to the word bath on that sheet, they would go b, a. My articulation was slightly off on my b, but I'm going to blame my sore throat for that. But they would know that actually there's 3 sounds in the word bath, b, a, th, and therefore that would help reinforce the strategies we're using in school. Now, when children are segmenting and blending, they might start off quite slowly and then get faster. And it's when they get faster that they hear the word. So they would hear bath and then think bath, because they can hear that. If they segment if they blend very slowly, then they're going to struggle to hear that sound. So don't be afraid to say, let's start slow and let's speed up. We've also got in there for them to practice the formation as well. Now, this is the formation of the core letter. By year 2, we're starting to develop a cursive handwriting style, so children are starting to join the letters. But for the parent sheets, particularly for reception and nursery, it is just the kind of core letter shape that children would see in reading books, because reading books aren't written in cursive style. Now, there's also a song there. I'm absolutely not going to be singing that now, but the children will be introduced to songs. So, it may be that they share that with you, but don't worry if not, because it'll be something they do in class, and some children love it, and some children just wait for that part of the lesson to be over. Now, just to correct something, one thing I have put there is each week we will post these on. There are some weeks where we might not post anything on Dojo, and we will tell you why that's the case. What that will mean is that that week the teacher's doing a recap. So it could be that they've done 10 weeks of new sounds, but actually we're just going to have a week just to consolidate what we've learned. So the teacher will share that on Class Dojo and just say, look, no new sounds this week. We're just going to focus on what we've done so far. And we use those as plug the gap weeks. So where we've got any children who've struggled with a particular sound, we're really going to home in and focus on that. As part of the phonics sessions, at the end of the session, children will have access to 2 resources. One is a workbook that they can work through independently. So that might be morning work in school when they come in. They have a go on their workbook, which helps them read and practice the sounds and write. And sometimes we might send those workbooks home. But that's something that the children do independently outside of the phonics session. The other thing that we do is we share some reading material with the children in class that links very directly to what they've done in the phonics session. So it's the same characters, similar storyline, and the same sounds and same tricky words, and they're highlighted to help the reading. Now, currently we have to print those, but Twinkle are going to be publishing them and we're going to be buying a set. So soon you will see a proper set of text rather than our printed text that we will send home from time to time. It won't be all the time because we keep some in school. We're also going to, after today's session, we didn't want to do it before, but after today's session, we're going to be creating a page on our website for phonics where this video will be, the slides will be, and lots of resources for parents, including a parent's guide and step-by-step guide for each phase that your child might be at. So there's a step-by-step guide for phase / level 2, one for level 3, and things for you to kind of be aware of if your child is struggling. You know, that it would give some suggestions. But of course, as always, come and talk to us. You will hopefully see that we send home Monster Phonics books. So these are these books that are on screen, which links to the sounds that the children have been learning in class that week or within a couple of weeks. And that's so that the children practice the sounds that they've been learning. Now, there's nothing to stop children reading other materials, you reading stories to them. But what's really important is that they do get time to practice and consolidate the sounds that they've been learning in school. Now, we do listen to readers in school, and as much as we can, and unfortunately, we've not had reading volunteers in for a while, but we're hoping to get some reading volunteers back so that we can do more of that. But these books are, you know, really important to get children to be familiar with the sounds. I'm just going to take another drink, excuse me. Okay. Now, I know some parents, because I have the conversation regularly, we have parents saying, look, my child just won't read at home. Yeah, well, you know, it's a battle. I think a couple of things that are really important. One, reading routine, so that children get used to, you know, reading at a set time. And it's something where we eliminate distractions. So we turn the television off, we sit on a comfy chair, we curl up with a blanket, you know, we read. If children are struggling, read to them. That has a huge impact on children. But trying to create that really positive experience, which is just nice parent time. So as I say, reading to your child is just as important as reading with your child. So you reading to them is as important as them reading to you. And also getting them to talk about their book. So that could be things like looking at the pictures. What do we think this is going to be about? Who are the main characters? Where's it set? What do you think about that? What would you do in this situation? You know, did you think that was funny? Why was that funny? But having that conversation with them and telling them what you think as well. I mean, keep it positive, but, you know, telling them what you think so that they're getting used to talking about stories from a very early age and we're developing that interest. Talk about using their phonics when they're decoding. So when they are reading, if they're using the phonics, if you're seeing them doing this, or they're, you know, segmenting and then blending, comment on that, celebrate that, say that, you know, that's brilliant. If they're struggling with a sound, Say, okay, let's have a look on YouTube. Let's see what Mr. Thorne says when he does this sound. And, ask questions. Reading without comprehension is pointless. And sadly, we do have children in school who can read, and they're really fluent readers. But when you ask them, what have they read? They don't really know, because they've just gone through the motions of making the sounds. So huge focus on, okay, let's just make sure we understand what we've read. Let's talk about the story. Can they tell you the story? Once they've read a story, can they tell you the main thing that happened in the story? That talk from an early age is really important. When you're reading to them, who's the main character? Where's it set? What was the main thing that happened? What was your favourite bit? Really important. We're doing all we can in school to allocate resources to make sure we're listening to children read as much as possible. Part of that is that at the moment, I've told the staff to reduce what they're writing in the home reading journals. Because if you imagine they listen to a child read for 10 minutes and they spend 5 minutes writing it up, that's limiting the number of children that they can listen to read. So I will be communicating again, but we will be sharing stamps. We will be using stamps in the reading record to say when we've listened to your child read, and the teacher would only write a note if there was something of concern or something to flag up. But we get, because it's reading practice, they're very similar. So we're just going to try and be really sensible with our time and make sure teaching assistants and teachers can read with as many children as possible. Okay, we've also introduced a new phonics assessment scheme that works alongside Twinkle Phonics. What this is it's an online program that the children do one-to-one with an adult in school. And it's a series of flashcards, and it'll ask them to make the sound, a series of blending activities, and a series of segmented activities, so counting the sounds. All children have now done this with an adult. It was really useful because not only have we got the data, but we've spent 20 minutes one-to-one with every child to assess where their very specific gaps are. Now we're able to share those gaps. So we could go on to Mr. Dewar's record and print out which sounds did he struggle. So which ones are we now prioritizing in? What that means is that that child can continue with their normal phonics teaching whilst we use intervention, parents, and some resources to plug the gaps that have gone before, rather than holding them back. So we have shared this with some parents as a way of just keep practicing. And our plan is to share those at the beginning of next week with all children in in reception year 1 and year 2, and any children in nursery who we've moved on to level 2. We will be doing these assessments half-termly or more regularly if we think we need to move children on. And we will share the sounds and the words that children have been struggling with you, so that you can practice at home. Now, it's very similar to what we used to do in terms of sharing flashcards and asking you to practice the flashcards with children. It's just it'll be on one sheet of paper, and the sheet of paper looks exactly like the one on the screen, and it'll have your child's name on and give you some tips as well. So just before I kind of stop and just have a look to see if there's any questions, I kind of go back to an earlier point, which is phonics has been disrupted by lockdowns, and we're wanting to work really, really hard to address that and plug the gap so that children are fluent and confident readers, ideally by the end of year 1, but certainly by the end of year 2, so that when they go into Key Stage 2, they're able to access the whole curriculum confidently because they can read, because there is a huge demand in all subjects for reading in Key Stage 2. There is a little bit here for us to share with you. So you'll notice that later this week, staff will share the sounds on Class Dojo. We'll also be sharing information about which adult's working with your child, so you know what to look for. And we're also going to be sharing the parent guides. I'm going to summarise all of that in a letter at the end of the week, so you know where those resources are. And again, if people struggle with Class Dojo, just talk to the teachers, because we want to accommodate a really good home learning partnership around phonics. And as I say, this will be our big focus. If you go away today and you've got further questions, feel free to speak to the other members of staff. Feel free to chat to me. Probably worth just pointing out, I'm leading this session not because I'm the head teacher, but because I'm the English subject leader. And I'm really passionate about making sure children love reading and they have the skills to read and be successful. So I really appreciate the support with this. I'll also be contacting Year 2 parents this week as well, to let Year 2 parents know whether your child passed the phonics screening test, which was delayed from last year to the end of last term. So they should have done it in Year 1, but they did it at the end of the autumn term in Year 2. If they've not passed yet, and it is very much not passed yet, we're going to re-enter them for screening at the end of the year, and we'll share with you what we are doing in school to support them, to plug the gaps. So Year 2 parents will have something slightly different and individual. So I'm just going to have a look at the questions. Okay, so there's a question here. If a child is in Year 1 and is perhaps at level 3 or 4, how are you going to teach them if children in the class are at different levels? So as I think I alluded to earlier, we're teaching children in really small groups that are streamed, so that we're children who are at a similar stage to them. Now, if they are significantly behind where they should be, they'll be receiving additional intervention. Now, we do normally notify parents when we're doing additional intervention, but with phonics, sometimes that intervention is 3 15-minute sessions, because it's a specific, they're struggling with one sound or they're struggling with a couple of tricky words, and 3 sessions 1-to-1 addresses that. If it's longer term, we'll notify you. But I think for short term, we'd end up doing quite a bit of paperwork, which again is taking staff away from working with children. But yeah, the idea is that children split down into ability groupings, and anyone that needs that boost gets it. There's a further question here. When's best to ask staff questions? I'm conscious they're busy at the beginning and the end of the day, so it's really tricky. Look, I absolutely, I get that. And because we're in bubbles at the moment, the staff aren't out as much. I am hoping, although the current case numbers in schools aren't great, but I am hoping that within the next few weeks, we'll go back to normality of children being on the playground lining up and staff being out in the morning and staff being out at the end of the day, so that people can catch staff for incidental stuff. If it's more than a quick 2-3 minute, 5-minute conversation, then what you can do is absolutely contact the school office and ask for that teacher to give you a ring, and they'll phone you or arrange a face-to-face appointment when we can. Please do not feel bad about doing that. We would far rather you said, look, can I have a phone call with a teacher? It's going to take 5 minutes. That's great. Absolutely do that. But I do appreciate that at the minute, that relationship, that connection is not as good as we want it to be, just because 1, we've been incredibly short-staffed, 2, we're operating in bubbles, and that, that's just stretching us a bit. But please phone. I'm not seeing any more questions, so thank you very much for giving up your time this evening. Really do appreciate the support we get from parents. I was speaking to a colleague at another school today and said I had a phonics meeting tonight, and they said, oh, will you get 3 parents? And I said, no. We'll have a really good turnout. Our parents always do support us with these things, and we have. So thank you for that. This is the start of a journey. There's quite a bit more to follow, and we'll absolutely keep in touch. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you very much.